Sometimes you find a news story that is the perfect representation of an idea, a concept, a phenomenon, and that's what this story is. We have Sam Brinton, the very famous, very provocative, very, at this point, well-known nuclear waste disposal chief for the Biden administration. Now, this is a position that is usually given to some kind of bespectacled scientist that nobody knows. The person who runs the kind of supervisory capacity of the nuclear waste is not a household name typically, and is certainly never someone that generates a lot of discussion. But in this case, it's different. The question is why? The answer is obvious once you see the photographs. Sam Brinton is a non-binary, a biological male who enjoys transgressive dress styles. He sometimes sports a bald head with a mustache and a long cocktail dress with heels. And then, even more kind of not safe for work, he has very publicly displayed his favorite activities: kink, BDSM, puppy play, etc. He's teaching these classes, he's taking these photographs, posting them on social media, displaying his kinks for all to see. And so when he was appointed to this position, of course, this is a firestorm. You have a high-level official that is very publicly displaying these kind of fetishes and kinks. It's the kind of perfect clickbait or for conservative media in particular. So you see this story running wild across the media. Now, Mr. Brinton has now lost his job. I think he maybe even goes by Mix Brinton, some other neo-pronoun, but he's lost his job because he was allegedly caught stealing women's luggage at airports, and then, I think quite probably, experimenting with women's clothing in that luggage, and then, of course, doing it all on video. So police have, I believe, a warrant out for his arrest. And so, in one sense, this is a very simple, almost a tabloid story for the conservative press. Non-binary, kind of kink-oriented, they, them, arrested for stealing women's luggage. But I think there's actually something much deeper at play here. Actually, the story, the rise and fall of Sam Brinton reveals a certain strain of ideological construction that is very, very important for you to understand. And so the best way to think about Sam Brinton is as an ideological construct. And so you may hear this a lot, that according to left-wing postmodernists or queer theorists, that gender is a social construct. And to a certain extent, they're actually right. You have, in my view, a human nature, a biological nature, sexual nature, male or female, with limited biological exceptions. But you also have, everyone has, a surface level or a social level constructed identity. This is, of course, true. It was true before queer theory. It's going to be true after queer theory. And in a sense, the queer theorists were right in identifying it. And Sam Brinton is an example of what happens when you try to limit or push down or kind of decenter those biological human natural systems, and then try to very ostentatiously privilege or raise up or center the socially and ideologically constructed gender or sexual expression. And so Mr. Brinton carefully and is accused of fabricating his biography to create a victim narrative that very closely aligns with the ideological and political narratives of queer theory, saying that he underwent horrific abuse in gay conversion therapy, which turns out may not be true. And then he's also cultivated his physical image, his performance of gender, very ostentatiously to embody the principles of queer theory, to make a mockery or to make a conflict or to make a contradiction of male image, female image, biological image, social construction. And so in some ways you can look at this person as an abstract ideology in human form. Again, an abstract ideology, queer theory, gender ideology, deconstructionism, postmodernism, in human form. He's shaping his biography, he's shaping his own narrative as an individual according to the dictates of a pre-existing and abstract ideology. And so there's three things to understand about this, because this is really quite interesting, this phenomenon, about queer theory in human form. One, the political narrative is not actually about generating tolerance, but about mandating affirmation. And so in one sense, this isn't about saying, well, people who identify as trans should be afforded the same rights as everyone else under the law. A position with which I agree, and I think almost certainly virtually all Americans agree. If you said, well, does every American deserve equal treatment under the law, regardless of their gender expression, self-proclaimed gender identity, sexual orientation, etc., I agree. Sam Brinton should have the right, just as any other American should have. But that's not what it's about. It's about mandatory affirmation of the ideology expressed in human form. So it almost reminds me of like a North Korean propaganda scene in which Kim Jong-un or some functionary is going forth to talk to the people, and everyone is crying and saying how beautiful it is, and they're doing the kind of North Korean version of the "Yes, Queen" meme. You know, we're so excited. This is the greatest thing that ever happened. You know, Kim Jong-un looks so handsome in his North Korean suit. You have to celebrate. You have to affirm. You have to position someone like Sam Brinton not as an American that should be evaluated on his competence at his job, that should be afforded equal protection under law, but as a hero of our time to be celebrated. We need North Korean socialist realism paintings of Sam Brinton hung up in elementary schools everywhere, because he is a new, non-binary, progressive hero of the revolution. This is what it's about. It's not about tolerance. It's about mandating affirmation in the culture. The second thing is it's not about sexual orientation. It's about sex. And so, again, we don't know Sam Brinton's sexual orientation. I don't think it really matters for his position as a government official at all. But the point is actually about the sex and sexuality. And specifically following someone like Gayle Rubin, one of the founders of queer theory, who came up with this idea that in order to create liberation, you have to engage in very public and very transgressive sex. BDSM, kink, in this case, puppy play, and all doing it very publicly. Because the idea is that physical transgressive sex is a mechanism of liberation. And so Sam Brinton, again, is teaching this ideology. He's practicing this ideology. And then he is leaving a long trail of social media posts promoting this ideology. And again, this is eliminating the distinction between public and private. Sam Brinton, according to me, can do whatever he wants. If that's his thing in private, in the bedroom, with anyone, all power to you. Do your thing. But the idea is that, no, this has to be transgressing public systems and hierarchies. And so that's the third point that it brings all of this to. What is the point of this? Why is he doing this? Why are we supposed to celebrate this? What is the function of this philosophically or ideologically? It's about dismantling what queer theorists call heteronormativity. The idea is that society is arranged to privilege heterosexual reproduction and culture and manners and mores, and what Judith Butler calls phallologocentrism. Very fancy word that if you translate it means the logic of the privileging the logic of the phallus, or in more blunt terms and maybe more crude terms, the logic of the penis. That's actually what she's saying. This is a very highfalutin, very sophisticated way of saying that we're privileging male logic, male thinking. And so the queer theorists, and then someone like Sam Brinton, is saying, no, we're going to actually destroy that logic. We're going to destroy those manners and mores. We're going to destroy those hierarchies. We're going to destroy what is a socially constructed world that privileges man and woman, that privileges human sexuality that's oriented towards nuclear family reproduction and kinship systems. We're going to actually lay waste to all of that because it's not something that is natural. It's not something that's determined by nature, man and woman. It's not in the image of God, certainly. This is an oppressive system that white male hierarchies have imposed upon queer logic and queer ways of knowing and being in order to destroy an alternative system of ontological matter or a system of being. And so what is the result of this? What are we seeing in our culture that's represented so beautifully and so visually and so provocatively in the Sam Brinton story? We're seeing the emergence of something that looks like a double standard. Well, let's say a straight male NASA engineer who was discovered having all of these kinks and fantasies and BDSM would not be celebrated as a hero of our time. He would be actually marginalized, maybe lose his job because that's inappropriate for people to be displaying so publicly. But in the case of someone who is protected with the identity politics and also the ideology of queer theory, it's celebrated. That's a double standard, right? It's not actually a double standard, though. If you think about it really specifically and more analytically, it's not a double standard at all. What we're seeing is a contradiction or a dialectical battle or a conflict between two ideological systems that are seeking hegemony, that are seeking a dominant position in our culture. On one hand, you have the manners and mores of what might be thought of as natural human sexuality, traditional human sexuality, or middle-class bourgeois norms. I think that's probably a fair thing to say, in which you say public and private should have some separation, society should be oriented towards kind of healthy, growing families, and we should permit transgressive sexuality, but in a kind of arrangement where we have tolerance, but we're oriented society towards the median family structure. This is something that is seen as bad, but in a sense, I think it's really the norm everywhere, and it's a norm for a reason. The challenge to this is queer normativity. So you have heteronormativity or phallologocentrism, and then this insurgent ideology that's protected by the institutions, that is celebrated by elite culture, that seeks to implement queer normativity. And so taking what was once at the margins and making it the center. Saying that actually, kink and BDSM used to be in kind of darkened clubs and kind of a more secret communities or private communities. No, that actually has to be a public model. That has to be a public morality. That has to be the new standard of sexuality that is then imposed on everyone else. And so these are not simply a one set of rules that are enforced unequally. No, these are two sets of rules that are seeking dominance within our institutions. And by elevating Sam Brinton, again, a very visual representation of this ideology, into a position of power in the government, they're saying, we're going to start actually making that real. And this, of course, is not a one-off story. We've seen this everywhere recently. You see Admiral Rachel Levine, who very clearly is a biological man, who is a trans activist. You see the ridiculous figure, the guy with the long fingernails that was invited to be a White House intern. You see Dylan Mulvaney, who was invited in some of the White House's PR campaigns. Again, a man, a biological male, who prances around as this kind of pseudo-female, almost comical representation of womanhood, and saying, it's day 38 of girlhood. I became a girl as an adult male, and this is my kind of beautiful kind of frolic through the flowers. And that's what we've seen, again, celebrated algorithmically, celebrated publicly, celebrated bureaucratically. And as well as some of these other examples, like I think it's some sort of high-level military official who takes pictures in uniform, also in a dog mask. This is a sexual idea that you can embody animal form as a sexual pleasure in a military uniform, which again, in a heteronormative or phallologocentric culture, would say, this is something that you might do privately, but you cannot mix your animalistic sexual fetish with the military uniform of the United States government. We'll see how that story plays out. And so what's happening here? There is an irony that I think is worth noting. I think is actually quite a beautiful irony, is that all of these people are privilege eaters. And by privilege eaters, it's a phrase that I think of as meaning people who seek to eat the privilege that could be around them, to create it and then to consume it. Because let's be honest, all of these people are white males. All of these people we've been discussing are actually white men. People who under queer theory, who under critical race theory are deemed at the top of the hierarchy, are deemed the oppressors. But through their ideology, through their socially constructed identity, and then through their transgressive sexual activity, can then eat the privileges, or kind of eat away at the privileges of the oppressed. And so they can take on victim narratives that provide them with actual substantive privileges in this other logic, in this other social structure, in this bureaucracy of the United States government. And so you have Rachel Levine, Dylan Mulvaney, Sam Brinton, who eat at the privilege of their biological sex and their racial, biological race, their kind of origins, their ancestry, while simultaneously eating at the privilege of their socially constructed sexual identity and expression. It's this kind of beautiful seizure of all of the privileges available, both at the level of natural ancestry, nature, and the level of social construction that we've been discussing. But there's also, in the Sam Brinton story, a kind of twist. There's an ending of this. And it's a very classic story structure. It's, I think, one of hubris. It's a kind of maybe even a Greek motif, that Sam Brinton eventually falls. Sam Brinton gets caught stealing women's luggage. I think more than likely trying on other women's clothing in a kind of sexual fixation, and then parading around with this luggage in other airports where he has been allegedly caught by security cameras. So ultimately, we shouldn't be surprised that someone with very public kinks, like Sam Brinton, has private kinks that are even more bizarre. And that's exactly what's happening here. But I think that Brinton's luggage theft downfall represents this process quite dramatically. And then as a epilogue or as a resolution, the kind of final twist in the story, even the LGBT magazines are now turning against Sam Brinton. You have one magazine that's now accusing him of fabricating his story in order to elevate himself, in order to chase clout, in order to get approval, in order to get a kind of navigation through the incentives of this new world where he can then be the main character, he can be the hero, he can be the figure above everyone else in this community. He's getting too much attention. And he's now a kind of risky person. He's a toxic person. He's been exposed as someone whose fetishes are not really part of this kind of Judith Butler liberation, but are actually maybe part of a criminal proclivity, a sexual kleptomania, perhaps. And so he's been abandoned by the movement. He's been now denounced by the movement. And again, in this very beautiful North Korean kind of way. Yes, General Song was a valiant hero of the revolution, but he was discovered to be an actual enemy of Kim Jong-un thought, an enemy of the regime, and therefore we have erased him from all the pictures. We have taken away his lapels. He's been disappeared into physical death in a way that in our postmodern world people are dispatched into reputational death. And so that's what's happening at the end of the Sam Brinton story. But all of it, the entire arc, the entire competition between ideologies, the entire human story of the rise and the fall, represents something that you must understand in order to understand what's happening around you every day.